please come. I need you. This is I need you.
Antonia Barra was born on December 3rd in the late 90s in Temuco, Chile, about 650 kilometers south of Santiago. Her parents were Alejandro Barra and Marcela Parra, and they had 3 other children: Sebastian, Catalina, Ignacia, and Carla. In summary, a typical middle-class Chilean family. With effort and sacrifice, Alejandro and Marcela ensured that their children grew up without major concerns, focusing on their education and development as well-rounded individuals. Antonia was always a source of pride for her parents since adolescence. She was responsible and excelled in her studies. Her desire to live life to the fullest was reflected in the dreams she began to have, showing a strong inclination to explore beyond her surroundings. Meanwhile, in Temuco, there was another young man, a little older than Antonia, who was also leading his life. This guy's name is Martin Pradenas Dior, and he is the son of Ivan Pradenas and Paola Dior. His parents also have 2 other children, Tomas and Francisca. Although not much is known about his early life, it is known that when he was quite young, Martin had a daughter with a girl named Danila Alanis Alvarez. However, their relationship didn't work out. Between 2015 and 2017, Antonia and Martin had contact through a famous social network. During that time, Antonia, around 15 years old, commented on Martin's photos with his daughter, but everything seemed to stay in the virtual realm. Later, Antonia focused on her studies in business engineering at the university, surrounded by friends with similar goals of striving, becoming professionals, and building a future. One of her friends was Consuelo Uribe, a law student, who also had a relationship with Rodrigo Canario Aguayo, though they broke up in August 2019. In the following weeks, perhaps seeking distraction after that breakup, Antonia, together with her friend Consuelo, planned a getaway to escape routine and the city. The plan was to go to the Black Room nightclub, formerly known as Sala Murano. Amid the festive atmosphere, after months of studying and being in the prime of her youth at the age of 20, the night held promise. They opened a couple of bottles of sparkling wine, toasted, danced, and got ready with their clothes and makeup. Alejandro, from Temuco, sent a text message to his daughter. He told her to take care, not to trust strangers, and to avoid dangerous situations. Antonia responded positively minutes before 10 o'clock. At that moment, Martin's group was getting ready to go to the first party, as he later recounted to the public ministry.
Luego de esto, ¿nos fuimos a la primera fiesta?
Sí, a la primera.
¿Cómo a qué hora?
Temprano, habrán sido las 10:30. Era una fiesta como de música electrónica.
Bien. ¿Hasta qué hora estuvimos?
2:30, 3.
Martín, en todo este lapso, ¿tu estado cómo estabas? ¿Estaba ya?
Sí,
¿Había consumido solo alcohol? ¿Había consumido alcohol?
No, había consumido, sí, habíamos tomado, estábamos tomando cola.
After finishing the 2 bottles of wine and being a bit tipsy, Antonia and Consuelo took a taxi and arrived at the nightclub around 1 in the morning on September 18, 2019. At the venue, they met other friends and had a shot of tequila. At one point, Antonia separated from the group and went to the electronic music area on the 2nd floor. There, she ran into a university classmate, Benjamin Morales. They danced for a while, strolled around the VIP area, the terrace, the bar, and back to the dance floor. Meanwhile, occasionally holding hands or sharing a kiss. It was at that very moment when Martin and his group arrived at the nightclub.
4 más tarde, como 10 para 4. Nos fuimos a la parte de la música electrónica. Nos quedamos ahí, tuvimos la fiesta compartiendo, tomamos un poco más. Después ya venían llegando los otros, nos íbamos encontrando con gente de acá de Temuco. Cuando fui a la barra, vi por primera vez a Antonia.
She was cheerful, uninhibited, and it showed. Later, Benjamin bought her a drink, but Antonia dropped it, so he ordered another. After a few sips, the glass spilled again. Considering she had already had enough to drink, Benjamin joked with his friend and decided not to buy her another one. At a certain point, Antonia disappeared. Around 6:45 in the morning, Consuelo went to look for her and found her chatting with Emilio Gobish, who was known and close to both. Consuelo told her that she wanted to leave, but Antonia preferred to stay. Then, Emilio offered to take her back home. Consuelo asked both of them to call her when they were outside the house. Later, she mentioned that at that moment, she had no problem with the idea, because she trusted Emilio as they chatted. Antonia told her that there was a guy, Martin, who was bothering her. He had asked her to stop talking to her friend.
Bueno, lo vi conversando y le mandé un mensaje a Antonio, así como...
¿Mensaje por qué vía?
Por Instagram. Estoy acá atrás,
Sí.
Deja ese huevón. Y no tuve respuesta.
Antonia simply ignored Martin, but later, in a moment of distraction, Emilio lost sight of his friend. They were actually separated for about 5 minutes, and when he found her again, she was chatting with Martin near the bar. According to Emilio's later statement in a legal document, that conversation didn't last more than 10 minutes. In any case, it seemed like a very short time to him. He saw them face to face, and then saw them walking towards the stairs. There was no one else with them, but Emilio noticed that Martin had Antonia by the arm. She, on the other hand, was looking up, unsure if they were talking, if she was looking at him, or perhaps she was disoriented. Antonia's father, Alejandro, has reiterated Emilio's version of that precise moment.
Pasa al lado de él, porque se cruzan, él ve a la Antonia con los ojos blancos, o sea, como que no tiene conciencia de nada.
According to Martin's account, he invited her to continue the party with him and his group at the rented house, and Antonia agreed. Marcela Calderon, the agent from the Sexual Crimes Unit of the Investigations Police of Temuco, provided a reconstruction of what happened.
De acuerdo a la versión de los testigos, las amistades del imputado que se trasladaban en vehículos particulares habrían ido llenos con la tripulación completa, por lo tanto ellos no caben ahí y por eso se van caminando.
A supermarket is conveniently located along the path that Martin and Antonia walked. Therefore, the surveillance video from the supermarket cameras became the most clear evidence that they left together. The sequence continues with Martin leading Antonia towards private property. Agent Michaela, in her professional capacity, provided her interpretation of what is seen in the images.
Se observa que el imputado habría trasladado a la víctima hacia el costado, hacia el interior del supermercado, donde se observa un caminar inestable de parte de ella, bastante inestable, y cierta resistencia en el trayecto.
As mentioned by prosecutor Miguel Rojas, who also works in the Sexual Crimes Unit in Temuco, the condition of the young woman left her vulnerable and at the mercy of the assailant.
Antonia estaba en un evidente estado de ebriedad, está bajo los efectos de un depresor del sistema nervioso central y no se aprecia lo mismo en relación al imputado. De hecho, hay una situación de dominio por parte del imputado, una situación de forcejeo por parte de la víctima que no logra tener éxito frente a las acciones que despliega el imputado. Particularmente me refiero a la situación, a la primera agresión sexual sufrida por Antonia.
Later, Martin and Antonia were seen walking back towards the rented house where the party was taking place. The camera from the Pucon Court of Letters also captured them on their way. All the people in the cabin, a total of 8, agreed on one detail. Antonia and Martin arrived around 8 in the morning. The only woman in the group was 19-year-old Barbara Fredrickson, who had recently joined the party and had not consumed alcohol. That's why she noticed the obvious state of drunkenness of the newly arrived couple, Antonia and Martin, whom she did not know. From that moment, Antonia's memories were blurry. But one thing was certain. Martin took her to a room in the cabin and abused her. Afterward, he came out and joined the rest, who were listening to loud music and chatting in the living room. While Antonia was devastated, alone, and unsure of what to do, she called one of her friends, Felipe Inostrosa.
Yo le contesto y no le entendí nada de lo que me decía. Se notaba como voz de que estaba muy curada, entonces como que no modulaba bien. Entonces algo le entendí que quería que la fuera a rescatar y le digo, ya, yo voy, no te preocupes, mándame tu ubicación.
But Felipe didn't give much importance to the young woman's discomfort and thought it might be just a bad moment or some minor inconvenience. Besides, there was another problem. He wasn't in Pucón, and to make matters worse, he had consumed some alcohol.
Y además un poco absurdo que la fuera a buscar para trasladarla 3-4 casas más donde se estaba quedando.
Antonia tried to talk to Consuelo, but her emotional state didn't allow her to express herself clearly, although she sent a voice message. Until she finally managed to make herself understood. After sending her GPS location, Consuelo went to pick up Antonia along with José Tomás Monge, her boyfriend. While José waited outside, Consuelo entered and upon encountering Martín inside, confronted him, but he feigned ignorance. Since the main priority was to get her friend out of there, they hurriedly left with Antonia. Outside, Consuelo and José embraced her and tried to provide support, as she was clearly devastated. Alejandro, always an affectionate and joking father, unaware of his daughter's state, sent her messages around the same time to inquire about her night, joking about how much she had drunk. Playing along, Antonia didn't want him to know the ordeal she was going through. In fact, when Consuelo and José urged her to report to the police what had happened, she refused because she didn't want her parents to find out. The next day, Antonia confronted Martín, but he clung to his version that everything had been consensual, and that's how it remained thereafter. In the days and weeks that followed, Antonia remained silent about the trauma she experienced that September morning. Although there were exceptions to this silence, such as some close friends and confidants, with whom she did share her feelings, like Andrés Sago.
Impactada, triste, se sentía sucia, no quería que nadie supiera, no quería denunciar por eso, porque Anto siempre fue una señorita muy reservada y no quería que esto se supiera por eso.
As a display of trust to those very few confidants, Antonia asked for loyalty and to keep silent. Determined to bear her pain alone, she did everything possible to confront reality as she always had. In fact, during that time, her lifelong friend, Dani Bravo, didn't notice any change in her.
Nunca hubo nada, ninguna sospecha. Para mí era la Anto de siempre. No, se lo quería, según yo, ella lo quería borrar.
On the other hand, Alonso Sigmund, a university mate, did notice that something was off with Antonia, especially because she started experiencing changes in her academic performance, like leaving 2 exams blank. Although he asked her, she always argued that she wasn't ready for exams because she was feeling low. Amidst all the distress Antonia was facing, there was yet another complication. Rumors, or at least a distorted version of what happened in Pucón, reached Rodrigo. So, without asking or attempting to verify if it was true, on October 12th, he wrote to Antonia accusing her of being with another man. Faced with the accusations and insults, she finally gathered the courage to tell him the whole truth. However, he didn't believe her. He continued playing the offended role because, supposedly, the infidelity happened on his birthday. On that day, Antonia was accompanied by her friend Francesca Duran, who witnessed Rodrigo's hurtful messages.
Muy fuerte, pero que como siempre sabía la clase de mina que fue y que era casi como la más fácil de toda la vida. Como que la hizo sentir muy mal.
The next day, Antonia sent Rodrigo a goodbye message. Shortly after, she shared a childhood video in the family messaging group where she was seen dancing, smiling at the camera, a sort of return to the past that could have been a sign of the difficult moment she was going through. On Sunday, October 13th, 2019, Carla arrived at the family home, and the first thing she did was go upstairs to see her sister Antonia. She found her lying on the bed and thought she was asleep. Although the light was on, Antonia barely perceived it. She asked Carla to turn it off, and then inquired about Martina, telling her that she loved her. Not long after, Antonia took her own life on the 3rd floor of her house in Temuco. Around 7 in the evening, Marcela, her mother, knocked several times but received no response.
Seguramente está durmiendo. Y mi hija sube al 2º piso y se pone a gritar muy fuerte. Y yo subo Y veo a la Antonia y dije, pero Antonia está subiendo la escalera. Y como que me giro y le miro su cara y no era la Antonia.
When her sister discovered that Antonia had no vital signs, Marcela's world crumbled. She screamed, was desperate, and completely out of control. The mother sought help from the neighbors, who came immediately and assisted in bringing Antonia down. Since Alejandro was not at home, they called him on the phone. The father was driving.
Una voz desgarradora, ¿cierto? Y no le entendí mucho, y luego me llama mi señora, la misma, gritando lo que había sucedido, ¿cierto? Y luego ya viene toda esta calma. Vino un momento de mucha calma, o sea, en la carretera, en vez de apretar el acelerador y llegar rápido, lo disminuí, yo creo que llegué a 80, 100 y me vine así. Porque tenía que asimilar.
Later, the forensic medical service determined that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. According to the information available at that time, it was considered a suicide attempt. Questions soon arose. None of it seemed to align with the personality of a young woman so full of life, eager to learn, travel, and ultimately live. However, overwhelmed by grief, no one in her family had the energy to investigate. No one, except her father.
No investiguemos nada porque ella tomó la decisión. No, pues dije yo, esto algo pasó si yo conozco a mi hija. Bueno, revisé su celular y me encuentro con una comunicación que tenía con su ex, donde las palabras no eran las más suaves que se refería hacia él.
For Alejandro, that was the first indication that something very serious had happened to his daughter for her to make that tragic decision. From there, tireless work began with the help of 4 private investigators and 2 lawyers. Within hours, the father faced the local press and read a statement explaining that his daughter had reasons for acting that way. Notes, reports, and questions began. He knew what he was up against and that his family would be under public scrutiny, but he felt he owed it to Antonia. With the assistance of the private team, the final period of the young woman's life was reconstructed, and Marcela and Alejandro filed a complaint against Martín. With strength and dignity, though his voice cracked at times, the father shared his story on several television programs. Amid the social upheaval in Chile, in a tumultuous moment for the country, Antonia's name began appearing on walls, social media tags, marches, and posters demanding justice. Antonia's shocking death led to 7 more complaints against Martín for alleged sexual abuses over time. Martín's family filed a protection order with the Court of Appeals of Temuco, claiming that some members of Antonia's family violated the right to honor and respect for private life, enshrined in Article 19, Section 4 of the Chilean Constitution. In particular, they mentioned that some of their personal data, such as addresses and phone numbers, were being disseminated, and they were also receiving violent messages, such as posters and images, mainly on social media. Martín's family claimed that Antonia's close circle was involved in such actions. On June 12, 2020, the Temuco court decided to accept the protection order, instructing Antonia's family to stop disclosing the data of the complainants on social media and refrain from making offensive or disqualifying posts against the Pradenas. This measure sparked outrage among those who believed that these restrictions only protected the alleged aggressor and hindered the visibility of multiple accusations against him. Meanwhile, Antonia's family appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the decision of the Temuco court on July 21st. Following this, Martín's lawyer, Gaspar Calderón, requested the application of the protection order from the Temuco Court of Appeals. In the same month, Martín was charged with assaults committed between 2010 and 2019. Thus began an investigation that captured the attention of the entire country, bearing Antonia's name and symbolizing the call for justice from thousands of abused women. On Wednesday, July 22, 2020, those close to Antonia and the public prosecutor's office suffered another disappointment. Contrary to the prosecution's request, the Temuco Guarantee Court ruled out preventive detention for Martín and ordered house arrest. Judge Federico Gutierrez argued that the precautionary measure should not become an anticipated penalty. The Temuco prosecutor's office charged Martín with 5 alleged sexual abuse crimes against other women between 2010 and 2019, but the judge ruled the prescription of 2 cases, including one that occurred between December 2012 and January 2013, involving a 13-year-old complainant at that time. The decision of house arrest and the prescription of some cases led to protests with pot banging and demonstrations in various cities across the country. After the protests, the Temuco Court of Appeals reviewed the case, accepted the prosecution's request, and changed the precautionary measure to preventive detention, considering that Martin represented a danger to society. Later, the same Court of Appeals revoked the prescription of 2 cases dictated by the judge. Since then, Alejandro, along with feminist organizations, worked to create a legal framework that penalized similar cases. In the legal process against Martin, the hearings for the preparation of the oral trial began. In February 2021, Martin's phone, which had been out of the authorities' reach, was found. The prosecution requested additional days to analyze the device and later reported that they found images of the accused displaying women's underwear, boasting of his actions. On August 26th, the Araucanía prosecutor's office filed charges against Martin before the Temuco Guarantee Court, accusing him of various crimes and requesting sentences totaling more than 40 years in prison. Nearly 2 years after the tragedy, Carla dedicated a heartfelt message to her sister Antonia on social media. In addition to expressing her unconditional love and the painful experience she was going through, she called on the community not to remain passive in situations similar to those Antonia experienced. She emphasized the importance of taking action when a woman is taken by a man in a vulnerable state. Carla also requested the media to cease disseminating her sister's image alongside the alleged assailant. As the year 2022 commenced, specifically on January 11, the preliminary hearings for the oral trial concluded. The magistrate of the Temuco Guarantee Court, Alfredo Cox, rejected the defense's 7th request to change Martin's preventive detention to total house arrest. Months later, on June 14th, the trial began at the Temuco Criminal Trial Court, with an expected duration of 37 days. During this period, the accused's defense presented various expert and witness testimonies, along with documentary and expert evidence. On August 6, the court issued a guilty verdict for Martin on charges of violation and sexual abuse, and on the 26th of the same month, a sentence of 20 years in prison was handed down. However, the sense of justice proved fleeting. On September 6th, a nullity appeal filed by Martin's defense lawyers was admitted. On December 29th, in a divided ruling, the Supreme Court accepted the nullity appeal and ordered a new trial. This decision was based on the lack of impartiality of Leonel Torres Labey, one of the judges who convicted Martin. Meanwhile, activism led by Marcelo and Alejandro in support of a broader cause took shape in the so-called Antonia Law. The project aimed to amend various laws to enhance procedural guarantees, protect the rights of victims of sexual crimes, and prevent their revictimization. The Antonia Law was enacted at the end of 2022 and stipulates that a person committing prior acts of gender-based violence against the victim, leading the victim to attempt self-harm, will be sanctioned with imprisonment. In 2023, a new trial will be conducted for Martin, charged with being an instigator of femicide for driving someone to take their own life. Preparations began in January, but on March 16th, Martin's legal team resigned, leaving the public defender's office as his legal representation. The second trial, involving 5 counts of sexual abuse and 2 of carnal knowledge, commenced on April 24th and focused on incidents occurring between 2010 and 2019 in the Araucanía region. Martin refused to remain silent, denied the abuses, and attributed the incidents to alcohol consumption. The public prosecutor's office argued that he targeted vulnerable victims, taking advantage of the victim's inability to resist due to alcohol. On July 7, 2023, he was found guilty of transgression and sexual abuse against 6 victims, including Antonia Barra. Judge José Ignacio Raúl ruled that the evidence from victims, witnesses, and law enforcement was sufficient, and it was determined that Martin would be prohibited from working for life in positions involving a direct and regular relationship with minors. Despite the prosecution's request for a 41-year prison term, Martin was sentenced to 17 years on July 28, 2023. With the 3 years spent in pretrial detention deducted, he will serve 14 years behind bars. The sentence was praised for acknowledging the truth of the victims, according to the regional prosecutor of Araucanía, Roberto Garrido. Alejandro's disappointment in the verdict was evident. Although he clarified that his family's dissatisfaction did not intend to further accumulate suffering, they knew that no sentence, whether it be 40 or 100 years for Martin, could completely alleviate the sadness of losing Antonia. Well, dear viewer, here concludes today's criminal story. I would love to hear your opinion, so please leave it in the video comments. Let us always remember to show respect towards the victim and their family when discussing. Subscribe and leave a like to let me know that you appreciate my work. Good night, until the next criminal story.